I've written two nonfiction books, two works of nonfiction. First is A Stranger's Pose, which came out in 2018. And the other, the new one, is I Am Still With You, A Reckoning with Silence, Inheritance, and History. And it would come out next February. So I'm going to read from both books to give you a sense of where I was and where I came to. My name recalls the flashpoint of family tragedy, an uncle's disappearance during the Biafran War. Emmanuel, a name my father didn't recall was my uncle's until my grandmother pointed it out to him when they visited Afikpo the 1st December after my birth. In its literal meaning, the name affirms a presence, God with us. The last time they saw my uncle was in the final year of the war. He wore a bandage around his arm. He had come in secret to tell them he was okay, would be okay, only a matter of time now. The end was in sight. No one would see him after that or receive news of his death. How could my father forget his brother bore my name? But he couldn't have. Remembering is not a mere act of will. In Afikpo, our names denote an unbroken link to the ancestors. The knowledge of the past is passed down in repressed retellings. My name is the fragment of a memory my father couldn't articulate at the moment of my birth. I am the one who returned, who returns. I am the recalcitrant returnee. I seek my uncle's image. My father has told me there is a surviving photograph of him. I know there is a bookcase in the sitting room of the family house, at the entrance of which another uncle who built it had inscribed, "Because it is mine." In previous trip, I went to the bookcase in search of the books my father read as an undergraduate, perusing with a boy's uncomprehending mind. On this visit, the bookcase is nothing but a container for tattered books and papers in an uninhabited room with broken shutters. The books I see, if their covers remain, are solid with fingerprints. Or sometimes the pages are torn in two. I can tell these are not the traces of inquisitive hands, but of minds long disaffected. If, as a boy, I stared at the bookcase as a sacred reminder of my father's student days, the children of my relatives treat it as a curious plaything from the past. Before pulling the bookcase open, I forget what the photograph is alleged to depict. My uncle standing with his malnourished siblings, his arms swathed in bandages, or my uncle sitting on a pile of broken rock, his back to our town's only secondary school, wearing bell-bottom trousers. I lift book after book, seeking the photo album. What I perceived at the moment of entering the house becomes true. The album hasn't survived years of disregard. I fold my arms in silent rage. I look above the bookcase and see that even other photographs of my uncle who built the house, my cousins as babies, and my grandparents in their rare couple photograph have been taken away. Built with mud bricks in the 1970s, badly maintained, it survives in the 2000s as a dingy house. Any day now, it might cave in, retaining its use through nostalgia or family law. My uncle's photograph is unreachable. I do not know his face. As if until I find him, what he looked like, my name remains suspect, and I a fake copy. So that's from A Stranger's Pose. I'll read from the new book. Consider these recorded facts about Sunday, January 11, 1970. It is the final 24 hours before the Uli airstrip, a clandestine location converted from stretches of road that ran for a sufficient distance, will be overrun. The control tower has been abandoned except for a priest who remains there to warn all oncoming flights that his fellow Biafran staff have fled into the bush and that the landing strip has become so damaged, up to 500 meters of it was riddled with bomb craters by the night of January 8th, as to render the place useless. Yet there is a matter of Biafran national emergency, and the airstrip must remain in use. The day before, at the final meeting with his cabinet, Ojukwu had selected a few to accompany him abroad to search for peace. I know that your prayers go with me as I go in search of peace, and that God willing, I shall soon be back among you, he said in his final broadcast. The night before that, a super constellation with a crew that included an American pilot, a Biafran co-pilot, and a British flight engineer had been flown in from Sao Tome to aid the runaway Biafran government officials. Now Ojukwu arrives in Uli for the flight with his entourage. The super constellation is stowed in the dark. Several people are waiting to leave, if they can get on. But Ojukwu specifies that only his entourage can travel with him, and a government official who is there with his family is instructed to separate those who can leave and those who cannot. There is a French Red Cross plane on the other side of the strip, Ojukwu says, so those left behind can board that aircraft. Before he sets out, he speaks to Major General Effiong, whom he has appointed as the officer in charge of the army in his absence. It is just before midnight. Do your best, Ojukwu tells his deputy. Try to hold out for 2 weeks. I would be back, and everything would be just fine. But the deputy finds such confidence duplicitous. His boss knows it is a hopeless situation and is trying to sound as if otherwise. It was like being left in a rudderless dinghy in a foaming and boiling sea of limitless expanse, Effiong later wrote in his war memoir. The sea was real, the dinghy was uncertain. I left Uli Airport before the plane took off with a funny sense of relief, confusion, uncertainty, and even of betrayal. Once Ojukwu is on board, accompanied by a French woman, described in some accounts as a spy, though it's unclear for whom, the door is slammed shut. There are only 4 seats in the cargo plane. Ojukwu and his female friend take 2. The other 2 are taken by 2 officials present, and a 3rd official has to sit with a crew member near the cockpit. The other passengers are either sitting on the floor or atop luggage. 2 officials share a glass of whiskey. Ojukwu is calm and collected, even managing to tell jokes. The plane touches down at a military airport in Abidjan at 6 in the morning. We have made it, says the official at the cockpit to Ojukwu, beaming with elation. Things aren't as undramatic for those intent on using the Red Cross plane, a cargo aircraft manned by Rhodesian crew members. Earlier that night, European relief workers had brought sick children to the airstrip in an attempt to fly them out to Libreville, the Gabonese capital. They had come in 2 trucks. Just as they begin to load the plane with the children, 2 Mercedes arrive and pull up behind the plane. The cars are full of the wives of senior Biafran officials and overloaded with their luggage. Some Biafran soldiers run toward the aircraft and with their guns at the ready, order that the children be kept from boarding. In that dark night, you could smell rather than see the fear to get out, says one of the relief workers when later describing the scene. And the fear of the Biafran soldiers in that wild mood is more terrifying than the approaching Nigerians. So the children are unloaded. People are now falling over each other, desperate to clamber on aboard. The soldiers, to calm the panic, begin to shoot in the air. The pilot orders his flight engineer to kick away the ladder at the back of the aircraft. At the same time, also at the pilot's instruction, the co-pilot increases the engine power. The plane moves forward. The pilot turns the aircraft to the right and onto the runway. He throttles for takeoff. With a sudden shudder of the plane and the simultaneous kicking of the ladder, bodies fly off to the side. Passengers, including a few of the sick children, are injured. By some accounts, the propeller kills someone in the process. Families of men who had managed to get aboard are left stranded. A stowaway appears at the cockpit door once the plane is Libreville bound, having hidden in the toilet. No one can tell who he is. The stowaway is my uncle. I imagine this. Hadn't my father told me that after the end of the war, as people made their way back from the places they had fled to, some returned from Libreville. My father also said that there were days when he thought, what if my brother returns from Gabon? Thus, my uncle is one of the soldiers who begins to shoot in the air to prevent anyone but the wives of Biafran government officials from climbing onto the plane. Once the shooting intensifies, he senses an opportunity. If he could climb aboard and purport to help with keeping anyone from coming in, he might stay put. In other circumstances, if the pilot hadn't instructed his crew to kick the ladder and power the engines, he might have been found out as soon as he wasn't seen to be descending. But this is what he manages to do, shove his way through while hauling himself above the ladder. Then he rushes into the toilet and shuts himself in. Truly, he hadn't expected the takeoff to be as swift or the crew as inconsiderate. He had thought they would allow more time, more people, that one or a few children could remain. And as the plane tilts upward, he's struggling to contain his thrill, to manage the knowledge of having escaped. He even touches his leg to confirm that it isn't phantom, that he hadn't thrust it away when he kicked at someone pulling him downward. He pulls his knees toward his chest and lets out a sigh. He raises himself above and leaves the toilet, finding the place too small and the stink unbearable, and, most importantly, knowing that no matter what the consequences are, he cannot be dropped from the sky. When the plane lands on the morning of January 11, the stowaway is handed over to Gabonese officials. I have found no record of what happens to him next. Thank you.